we cannot trust the Americans as we have in the past, where we pretty much put our lives in their hands because we have integrated our defense completely with the Americans. There has been talks in Denmark previously whether we even needed to have a complete defense. I mean, maybe we should just have certain branches of our armed forces. Maybe we could do without submarines. Maybe we could do without a navy, or maybe we could do without an air force, something like that, and just specialize in certain capacities that were then part of the NATO defense.
Mhm.
That idea is gone. I mean, now we know that we have to be able to fight and have a complete armed force, and we can't rely on the Americans because it can switch very quickly.
Hello and welcome to the Trump Report. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we are in Denmark and we're speaking to Rasmus Jarlov, the Danish MP and chair of the Danish Defence Committee. Rasmus, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
What have you made of Donald Trump's comments at Davos about Greenland and Denmark in the last 24 hours?
A lot, but there's also still a lot of questions. We're, of course, happy that the talks about military invasion have stopped, and we also think it's good that there won't be any terrorists, at least for now. So the level of confrontation is a little bit smaller now, and that's good. And then we also heard about a framework for a deal that we don't really know much about. And that means, of course, that there is no deal, because the deal has to be made between Denmark and Greenland on one side and the United States on the other side. And since our government hasn't agreed to anything, then there is no deal. But it means that we have started talks about what it is that the Americans actually and concretely want in Greenland. And that's important for us, because if they have concrete wishes, concrete mining projects, military bases, or other military capacities that they think is needed in Greenland, then we can have a constructive talk about how to achieve those objectives. But it's important that we are not going to give up on the sovereignty of Greenland. That belongs to Denmark and Greenland, and not to the Americans.
And so you haven't been given any details about this framework deal that Donald Trump says is already being talked about?
No, it is our government and not me that negotiates.
Mm.
And it sounds like there has been consultations between the Prime Minister and Mark Rutte. But it also sounds like our government is not fully aware of what they have talked about, at least from the um, statements they made so far. So, of course, that leaves a lot of questions. But it does sound like we will go on to a track of talking about concrete needs in Greenland, rather than just talking about the Americans owning Greenland, which is a difficult talk because it's something we are very, very unwilling to do.
And there have been rumours that part of this framework that's being discussed is the idea of US sovereign military bases in Greenland. Military bases where the land on which the base is technically US land. Is that something that you think might work? It does mean some element of sovereignty is under question, but obviously the overall sovereignty of Greenland would still be very much Denmark's.
I can't see that happening at all. I mean, the sovereignty of Greenland does not belong to the Americans, and they have no right to claim that. It's not their country, and they don't have a legitimate claim to any part of Greenland. And we're not going to fall into the trap that just because the Americans have threatened with military force and annexation, then we're going to get into something that's clearly unreasonable also.
And there does perhaps seem to be a lack of reading up by Donald Trump here. He used the term to describe this framework as "we can have all the bases that we want." That seems to have essentially always been the case with Greenland, hasn't it? I mean, Denmark is a NATO ally. That is correct, isn't it?
Yes. US can put the troops and bases that they want in Greenland, but they don't get the sovereignty. But they have something that's almost the same and almost as good from a military point of view, which is the right to put their soldiers there, to build bases without an expiry date. So this is not a temporary lease. This is not something that we will take away from them again. It's not in question. It's not fragile. it's a pretty permanent right to station troops and bases in Greenland, and they have that right. We're not planning to take that away from them, so they can do that if they want, and they don't need to change any framework to be able to do it.
And as you say, Donald Trump appears to have ruled out any more US action over Greenland military action. Do you believe him when he says that, though, and that he won't come back to the idea of military action later if he doesn't get what he wants out of this negotiation?
I mean, we can't decide or guess what the American president will do. We can only argue with facts and inform the Americans that we're not giving it to them voluntarily, but we are willing to discuss all their needs and assist them in achieving the objectives that they might have in Greenland. So I think we're being more than reasonable, very, very cooperative with the Americans, and we're keeping a door wide open for both having access to minerals and military capacities up there. So I think honestly that is very generous of us, given that it is actually the Greenlanders and Danes that own Greenland and not the Americans. So the starting point from all of this is that they have absolutely no right to anything in Greenland, and we're still giving them a lot of things.
And that is a little different from how Donald Trump phrased it yesterday at Davos at the World Economic Forum. He said that Denmark owes the US after World War II and during occupation. I assume no one in Denmark thinks that way.
We owe them gratitude for what they did for Europe in the Second World War, but everyone knows that that doesn't give the Americans right to take territory from countries that they have assisted in the Second World War. If that were the case, I mean, they could take land from Britain, from France, from Netherlands, Belgium, uh, and a very large number of countries would then be unsure whether the Americans would one day wake up and think, well, we helped you 80 years ago, so now we can take your territory. Of course, it does not work like that. We try to pay back by being a very good and loyal ally and helping the Americans. And if one day they were under attack, like they were in 2001, we will be there. But we're not going to give up land and people because of Second World War.
Indeed, and as you say, given that Denmark fought under Article 5 in response to 9/11, some of these comments coming out from the US president in the last few weeks, they've got to sting a little bit for some of your colleagues in the government and for Danes who fought alongside the US only this century.
There's a lot of insults every day. I heard the US Treasury Secretary say that he thinks Denmark is an irrelevant country. Trump is mocking us about having been invaded very quickly by the Germans, who are 15 times larger than Denmark. There's a lot of comments like that. I don't think we listen too much to it. I think we're beyond that. I mean, we're used to hearing things like that, and I don't think it really bites that much. It's more the unpredictability of the American security guarantee that concerns us, and that concerns us a lot.
Hmm. And so, to what extent will this impact wider Danish-US relations, or is this something that can be seen more as a temporary hiccup rather than something that's going to take a while to repair relations over?
Um, the level of trust that we had before is not coming back.
Mhm.
We cannot trust the Americans as we have in the past, where we pretty much put our lives in their hands because we have integrated our defense completely with the Americans. There has been talks in Denmark previously whether we even needed to have a complete defense. I mean, maybe we should just have certain branches of our armed forces. Maybe we could do without submarines. Maybe we could do without a navy, or maybe we could do without an air force, something like that, and just specialize in certain capacities that were then part of the NATO defense.
Mhm.
That idea is gone. I mean, now we know that we have to be able to fight and have a complete armed force, and we can't rely on the Americans because it can switch very quickly. And we don't know if the Americans are going back to valuing allies again, or whether they're going to continue to be hostile with Europe and try to extort us to take things that don't belong to them, just because they have the upper hand militarily. And that has big implications for the purchase of American weapons. I mean, can we trust that we can buy American weapons and that will not be used to blackmail us to take Greenland, for example? That's a real concern. And people are talking about this on all levels. We're talking about, I mean, can we get away from American IT systems because they can shut those off and they will do tremendous damage to our country and our society? Can we trust that they will not use that against us? Because they're weaponizing security and they're using security to blackmail us, and that really has large consequences for whether we can cooperate and trade with them. It's not too late to save NATO. I think NATO hopefully will be saved, and we will go back to being allies. But there's so much uncertainty now to whether the Americans would actually help us or whether they will sometimes be an enemy and try to take something from us.
And Danish troops have, of course, been deployed to Greenland in recent weeks. Are those troops going to stay there now, or is that deployment not necessarily relevant to what's been going on in the last few weeks?
It's too early to say. It depends on how this situation lands and how it settles. So I can't say right now what the threat level will be in Greenland. There's really normally there would be no need to have large standing forces in Greenland, because Greenland is not threatened by an invasion from anyone except for the Americans, who have threatened with it in the past month or so. But other than that, it is completely out of the question that Russia would just suddenly launch an invasion of Greenland. If they did that, it would be a war with all of NATO. And Greenland would be a very weird place to start that war, because you don't achieve anything by taking Greenland. You just sit up there and freeze, and you won't achieve anything important militarily. So Greenland isn't worth starting a war with NATO over. And therefore, it is not necessary to have a large army standing ready in Greenland to counter an invasion under normal circumstances.
And of course, Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has been in London today speaking to British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Were you happy to see the level of European support that Denmark got over this issue?
We've been very grateful for the support we have received from the UK, from Keir Starmer, also from other leading politicians in the British Parliament. We've heard those speeches, and it means very much to us, because we cannot stand up to the Americans alone. And we do think it is important that you honor your treaties and you help your allies when they are in need. And European countries have shown that they will do that for us, and that's really important, and we're very thankful for that.
And the deployment of these troops that's happened in the last few weeks, it's been reported that part of the reason the US decided they would need to back down over this is because no one wants to see a shooting war in Greenland. Is there a level here, in a way here, has the idea of traditional deterrence worked in helping this climb down by the US government, in that they've seen that this is not going to be a sort of pushover and that Europe is willing to stand up for itself?
I mean, we're not claiming a victory over the Americans because they backed down from invading us. That's not the situation. We're glad that it's been clarified that military threat is off the table. But it's not like we have threatened the Americans or shown that we could defeat them in Greenland or anything like that. I think a bit of reason and sanity has prevailed here, because it has been clear that this would be a complete meltdown of the Western alliance. And hopefully that has made some kind of impression on the Americans also. But also the fact that the Greenlanders simply don't want to be Americans, because a lot of Americans and influencers from the MAGA camp seem to have gotten the idea that the Greenlanders wanted to be part of America. They were fed that lie from the beginning, and a lot of them seem to believe it. And the Greenlanders have made that crystal clear that's not the case. And I think that has also been very decisive in convincing the American public that this is not something you do. You don't invade a country, try to subjugate people, and take away their freedom in 2026 when you're celebrating your own 250 years of independence.
And do you think this has had an impact, if any, on the issue of Greenland's independence?
I think this has a big impact on the relationship, of course, between Denmark and Greenland in the future. Um, I hope Greenlanders have seen that we care a lot about Greenland, and we're willing to take a confrontation with the world's superpower for them to try to help preserve their freedom and their self-determination. And I think that will have an impact also on the future between our two countries.
And there's been President Zelensky of Ukraine has been speaking at Davos just before this interview. He's had a somewhat frustrated tone with Europe as well as the US. Is he right, do you think, to be worried about how all of this might be distracting from what was previously the main security focus in Europe, a possible threat from Russia?
It is a distraction from what we should be focusing on, which is to help Ukraine survive against a Russian invasion where they're murdering Ukrainians for no reason. That's what we should be focusing on. And Denmark has put a lot of money, a lot of military equipment to Ukraine. We're the leading contributor to Ukraine per capita. And that's by a pretty large margin, actually. So we really have tried to help in the fight against Russia. So if you want to be concerned about Russia, you should help Denmark and support us in what we're doing in Ukraine. You shouldn't threaten us in another area so that we have to put troops up there and we have to invest a lot of money up there that wouldn't be necessary if all of this had not happened. So yes, it is a distraction. We don't have infinite money for defense. We're willing to spend a lot, but of course, some of the money and troops that we have to use in Greenland cannot be used to assist Ukraine. And that's, of course, weakening the fight against Russia.
So the troops that have been sent to Greenland and some of the effort and money that will have had to have gone into the issue of Greenland in recent weeks, has that detracted in any way from Denmark's contribution to supporting Ukraine?
We don't have troops in Ukraine. We're not fighting the Russians on the ground. So the Danish troops that have been sent to Greenland wouldn't be fighting against the Russians in Ukraine. It's not like that. But of course, it is expensive to do these deployments. And we have to spend a lot of time and energy right now on thinking about how to defend Greenland. And we should be spending more of that energy on helping the Ukrainians, because that is the important fight against the Russians. That's how you weaken Russia. That's how you make sure that Russia is not a big threat against the Western world. That is to ensure that they don't win in Ukraine. The minute Russia wins in Ukraine, if we stop helping them, then you will see a real Russian threat in Europe and also in the Arctic, where they will have freed up resources to start focusing on that area.
And just finally, Rasmus, we spoke about the fact that Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, is leading on these negotiations now over Greenland. Is that right that he's leading the negotiations on this? I mean, I suppose it is a NATO North Atlantic Alliance issue, but are you worried about Denmark's involvement or less or lack thereof involvement in these talks?
It's easy to get annoyed with the appearance of Mark Rutte, but I don't think it's necessarily fair, because he is very intent on having good relations with President Trump, and that may actually be a really big advantage in situations like this, that he can talk to him, he can explain what the options are, also loyally to what is possible within the limits that we have as a country. So I think you should be careful not to judge what Mark Rutte is doing, but the jury is still out, because we haven't seen the so-called framework for a deal that he has discussed with Donald Trump. So we have to see that first before we sort of make up our minds about the efforts of Mark Rutte. But I wouldn't be too judgmental about what he's doing, even though sometimes you are wondering a little bit about what is going on in that relationship.
Well, Rasmus Jarlov, Danish MP and Defence Committee Chairman, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.